And we're continually doing that with each other. We're continually telling each other our stories. We're exchanging our aims. We're exchanging the manner in which we look at the world with one another. We're exchanging our emotional experience. That's what we have to offer each other. That's what we have to offer each other that's of value. Our alternative modes of being that might be more suitable. Aims that might be more suitable. Pathways forward that might be more efficient. Tools that might be more useful. Obstacles, ways to climb over obstacles we hadn't imagined. This is what stories do for us. A story is a description of the structure through which you look at the world. This is a radical thing to understand. It's quite unlike the typical materialist, reductionist, scientific view of the world, which is that you follow the facts as they reveal themselves. That's not true. There's an infinite number of facts. If someone throws you in the middle of the desert and you're lost, the facts aren't going to guide you forward. Right? You need a map, you need an aim, you need a mode of perception that structures the world so that you can navigate through it. That's what a story is. That's what a story is. And this is a very fundamental discovery. This discovery was really only made starting in the 1960s, and a variety of different disciplines, humanistic and scientific, converged on this realization more or less simultaneously. The French literary critics, the postmodern types, for example, they got there quite early. The postmodernists realized that we saw the world through a story. Now, they fouled up soon afterwards with their presumption that the story through which we see the world is one of power. That tilted them towards a demented and pathological Marxism. But at the same time, robotics engineers and people who are studying AI and computation and cognitive psychologists and people who are investigating perception and emotion, they all came to very similar conclusions. Right? The structure through which we see the world is a story. Right? We see the world through a story. Once you know that, well, why? Use the story to simplify the world and to specify it. So here, I'll give you a very simple example. So if I'm standing on this side of the stage, and I decide that I want to walk to that side of the stage, so now I've specified my aim. Well, obviously, I look towards my destination, right? Now, so what happens? Well, first of all you people instantly become irrelevant, right? Why? Well, you're still here. I could be attending to you, but why don't I? Well, you're not relevant to my goal, right? You're not in the pathway. You're neither a facilitator nor an impediment. You're simply not relevant. And everything that's not relevant to your aim, that's going to disappear, right? And so that's how you make a decision about how to simplify the world. You simplify and specify the world with your aim. Things that get in your way, they're negative. Things that move you forward, those are positive, right? And so here's an early moral lesson from that realization. If the world is manifesting itself to you as nothing but thorns and impediments, with no positive impulse, let's say, or calling to move forward, there's something wrong with your aim. The word sin, by the way, it's an archery term, at least from the Greek, although 3 languages converged on the same derivation. The Greek word for sin is hamartia, and it's an archery term. It means to miss the target. And so that's a good thing to know, right? I mean, if we're going to investigate the structure of the stories that guide us, it's useful to understand the most fundamental stories we have. It's clearly the case that the most fundamental stories we have, the stories out of which our culture emerged, are the stories of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And those are encapsulated most fundamentally in the biblical stories. And there's an emphasis in the biblical stories on sin, let's say, as a negative mode of being. And sin is characterized as failure to hit the target. It's an archery term. How can you fail to hit the target? Well, there's lots of ways you can fail to specify the target. That's what happens when people have a fragmented story. They don't have their act together. Things have fallen apart. They've wandered off the pathway. They're no longer on the straight and narrow path. They've wandered into perdition. They're in the outer darkness where there's gnashing of teeth. That's all They're in the desert that the Israelites encounter after they leave the tyranny. They're in the wasteland. They're consumed by chaos. The flood has come. That's all a consequence of failure of vision, failure of aim. A landscape that's bereft of structure, a place of anxiety and hopelessness, because that's actually what happens to you neurologically, neuropsychologically. When you're aimless, you are overwhelmed with anxiety because there's too bloody many choices, and you have no hope because hope is experienced in relationship to a goal. So you need a goal. You need to structure your aim. This is not optional. You know, John, when he introduced me, made reference to a study in the UK that said that 85% thereabouts of inhabitants of the UK felt their life was meaningless. As well, what's the proper diagnosis of that? The people perish without a vision. Right? You need an aim. Okay, so now we know a couple of things. You see the world through a story, and you're lost and hopeless without an aim. Okay, so another question immediately emerges once you know that, and that is, well, if you structure your perception of the world, your emotional experience of the world, your motivation, your understanding of others as a consequence of a story, what should the story be? Okay, that's the question that the biblical library, because it's a library, right? The Bible is a library of books, of separate books that were written by separate authors, separate human authors, and aggregated together for reasons we don't fully understand into what actually constitutes a coherent narrative, which is really quite a remarkable thing. It's not obvious at all how that narrative came about, and it's a remarkable fact that it has a very deep coherence. You could attribute it to the collective workings of the human imagination. That's sort of a psychoanalytic take. That would be akin to the interpretations that someone like the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung might have proposed, or say Joseph Campbell's study of a great investigator into the structure of mythology. Or you can take the religious tack and say that it's the cumulative record of the revelations of the divine. Or you can take the cynical tack and say that it's nothing but stories told by fallible human beings. Well, there's no such thing as nothing but stories. Right? Not if stories are more than mere entertainment. Not if stories are actually a representation of the structure through which you see the world. There's nothing mere about stories, not in the least. You know, and if we need stories to organize our action and our perceptions in the world, if we need stories to organize our life, that means our life depends on stories. And you might ask yourself, well, isn't what your life depends on real? Like, what's your definition of real? How about pain? Is that real? A story that provides your life with meaning can be a medication against existential catastrophe. And people die without meaning, right? You can die of everyday suffering without meaning. What does that mean? Well, the story leaves you, or the story that you're living is false or hollow, or the story that you're living is fragmented and incoherent. The consequences of that can be fatal.